Evan Rhodes stepped off the plane in Kathmandu with nothing but a 45-liter pack, a GoPro, and a journal he'd been writing in since Chile. At 34, he'd logged more solo miles than most full-time guides Patagonia, Denali, Iceland's glaciers, but it was Nepal that had haunted him for years. The Langtang Valley called to him like a whisper. He had no interest in Everest selfies or tourist-filled tea houses. What he wanted was isolation, stillness, maybe something else he couldn't quite name. He booked a jeep out of Kathmandu the next day, heading north through tight mountain switchbacks and roads half-eaten by landslides. Locals said the 2015 earthquake had shaken the valley into something unrecognizable. That didn't bother Evan. He welcomed places where maps lied and trails disappeared. On the drive, he barely spoke. Just watched the landscape unfold, terraces giving way to sheer rock, frost-glazed peaks lurking in the haze. When they reached Sayabrubesi, the last real town before the trailhead, Evan shook the driver's hand, slung his pack over his shoulder, and walked into the hills. He texted one friend, Langtang, Kianjin, back in 12 days. That was it. No itinerary, no GPS ping. Just a promise. For the first 4 days, everything followed the pattern he loved. Footpaths skirting deep gorges, yak bells echoing through thin air, nights spent in cheap guest houses with fire-warmed common rooms. Locals welcomed him with guarded smiles. A trekking log at Lama Hotel bore his name in thick black ink, E. Rhodes, USA, solo, headed north. There was nothing unusual, no sign of hesitation. By day 6, Evan had reached Kianjin Gompa, a remote outpost of stone homes and prayer flags strung between cracked buildings. He rested, drank salty butter tea, and scribbled in his notebook. Later, a tea shop owner remembered him asking about older trail zones not listed in guidebooks. Something about seeking silence. That night, Evan stood beneath a frozen sky, staring up at peaks that caught the stars like broken glass. He looked calm, settled, but something was shifting. He paid his bill the next morning and left early, before breakfast. A young porter watched him disappear down the trail, but not the main one. A narrower path, barely visible, leading east away from where he was supposed to go. He never checked in again. In Kathmandu, 5 days before setting out, Evan met a man at Pilgrim's Bookhouse in Tamil. Thin, sun-darkened, maybe mid-40s. They struck up a conversation over a worn map of the Langtang region. The man spoke softly, like every word was measured. Said he'd lived in Nepal for years, drawn by something buried deep in the snow. He asked Evan a strange question. Have you ever heard of the Devathan Trail? Evan hadn't. The man smiled like he expected that. According to him, it wasn't a marked path knot anymore, not since the quake. Said it ran along an old spiritual route once used by monks seeking visions. It's not for everyone, he said. It either breaks you or shows you what's real. He spoke of silence that hums, of places the wind avoids, of shrines that aren't on any map. Evan didn't laugh. He didn't call it nonsense. He listened. Later that night, he tore a corner off his map and penciled a faint line along the valley's eastern slope. He didn't tell Anu, not even Rachel, his sister, who had always been his emergency contact. To her, he said the usual, Langtang, 12 days. You know the drill. When Evan reached Kianjin Gompa, locals noticed he lingered in conversations with older villagers, asking about ruins east of the ridge. One man said Evan was asking about a cairn wrapped in red cloth, something children were told not to touch. Bad air, the old man warned him. Evan smiled, thanked him, and the next morning veered away from the pilgrim trail. He wasn't seen again. Satellite images taken weeks later would show a vague trail barely, more than a disturbance in the snow cutting across an eastern ridge past Kianjin. No campsites, no fires. Just a faint human trace leading toward glacial shelves locals didn't traverse. In his journal found years later, there was a single entry dated the day he left. I met a man who said some places don't want to be found. But I think that's why they call to us. The silence out there isn't empty, it's waiting. That route, whatever it was, wasn't on any official map. But Evan followed it anyway, into the white, into the quiet, towards something no one had spoken of in years. October 8th, 2015. The air above Numthang clung thin and sharp, the kind that bites when you breathe too deeply. It was just past noon when Dorje, a yak herder, spotted the foreigner moving along the slope above the village. Alone. No guide, no animal, no radio. Just a single hiker hugging the spine of a ridge most tourists never even noticed. Dorje said he moved with purpose, like he already knew where he was going. but something about him felt off. Too light for a long journey. No tent, no poles. Just a pack and a strange stillness. An hour later, two women collecting wood near a Mani wall saw him again. They said he paused, placed a hand on one of the prayer stones, and stood there for nearly a full minute, unmoving. Then he adjusted his bag, nodded slightly to no one, and continued east toward the frost-hardened path known locally as the Ghost Spinea, nickname whispered more than spoken. There's no road to Numthang. It's not on most maps. Just a cluster of stone huts, yaks, and the sound of wind scraping across slate. But everyone in that village remembers seeing Evan that day. The tall foreigner with the hollow eyes and soft smile. He didn't ask for water, didn't rest, didn't speak, just kept walking. Later that evening, a boy named Mingma saw a figure on the far ridge above the Chorten, silhouetted against the dimming sky. Too far to be sure, but the frame, the gait it matched. His father told him not to wave. The mountains, he said, sometimes walk with men that aren't really men. That was the last time anyone saw Evan Rhodes alive. There were no more sightings, no reports filed, just a quiet absence that settled over the trail like snowfall. Hikers passed through in the days that followed, but none recalled crossing paths with an American solo trekker. The path Evan had taken vanished into scrub and shadow, winding east into a terrain the locals called cursed. To the people of Numthang, travelers come and go. Some leave behind coins, or wrappers, or names in logbooks. Evan left only a question, a ripple in the fabric of their landscape. And then, like mist off a glacier, he was gone. By October 10th, Evan's signal disappeared. No pings, no posts. The last photo he'd uploaded showed nothing but mountains empty, overexposed, silent. A caption read, "Altitude clears everything." He'd tagged no one, liked nothing. Then the account went still. His sister Rachel waited. At first, she figured he'd gone deep. Evan did that sometimes off-grid treks. Digital silence, handwritten journals he never shared. But by day 15, the unease began to calcify. She texted, called, sent a message to the guest house he'd stayed at in Siabrubesi. No answer. The silence stretched thin, brittle. By day 20, she filed a missing persons report. The embassy logged it, but didn't sound alarmed. Solo trekkers in Nepal vanish all the time, they said. Landslides, avalanches, missteps. The terrain eats people and keeps them. The local police in Langtang pulled records. No one had seen him after Kyanjin Gompa. No check-ins, no permits beyond the one he filed at the beginning of his trek. His journal, mailed home weeks earlier, ended with a quote scribbled in the margin, "Some places are not meant to be returned from." That winter, a light snowfall came early, sealing the higher routes in ice. Search teams were delayed, helicopters grounded, and with each day, the probability narrowed. What had begun as a missing trekker became something else. A myth. A name whispered among guides and porters as a warning. In Kathmandu, a clerk at Pilgrim's Bookhouse remembered him. Vaguely. He bought old maps, he said. Ones no one uses anymore. In his hotel room, still untouched days after his disappearance, they found a paper napkin with strange symbols drawn in ink. No one could decipher them. Years passed. Hikers asked about Evan Rhodes. Some had heard of the American who vanished without a trace. Others carried printouts of his face in their packs, just in case. But nothing was ever found. No jacket, no journal, no bones. The trail absorbed him. The silence widened. And somewhere, in the snow-choked ridges above Langtang, a man had walked willingly into a place that didn't want to be found. His name faded from headlines. His posts buried by algorithms. But the mountain remembered, and it kept its secret. Rachel Rhodes called the U.S. Embassy on day 22. She'd already emailed trekking agencies, posted on travel forums, and messaged every hostel near Langtang. The responses were always the same. We'll ask around. But no one had seen Evan, not since Kyanjin, not on the return trails, not in the villages where hikers typically reappear, sunburned and starving. He was simply gone. The embassy logged the report, offered sympathy, and informed her of the situation on the ground. Nepal was still reeling from the earthquake months earlier. Landslides had torn up entire regions. Roads were gone, communications limited. Worse, protests over a border blockade had crippled fuel and supply lines. Civil unrest pulsed just beneath the surface. The country didn't have the resources for missing foreigners, especially not solo trekkers who'd wandered off the main trails. Local police took down the report but explained, politely, that without concrete evidence of injury or foul play, a formal search wouldn't be launched. They had no coordinates, no itinerary, and no idea which trail he'd taken. He could be anywhere, they said. People vanish in those mountains. Rachel flew to Kathmandu. She brought Evan's photo, printed flyers, and the hope that someone would help. Some nodded, said they'd seen him. Others shrugged. At best, she got vague directions. At worst, blank stares. The only real lead came from a trekker who claimed Evan asked about alternative routes. Old spiritual trails not shown on modern maps. But even that was just a rumor. A freelance guide offered to help, but wanted half the money up front. A helicopter pilot quoted her a price so high she laughed. No official rescue effort was underway. No coordinated teams. Just Rachel, a stack of photos, and the haunting sense that her brother's trail had been erased before it had even begun. By the end of the week, she understood. This wouldn't be a search. Not really. No rangers in orange jackets, no aerial sweeps or rescue dogs. The mountains weren't talking, and the country wasn't listening. Evan Rhodes had walked into the Himalayas during a moment when the world had turned its gaze inward. Earthquake. Protest. Shortages. His timing couldn't have been worse. Or maybe it had been perfect if disappearing had always been the plan. 2 weeks later, a porter named Tashi Dorje stumbled across something strange near the edge of a collapsed ridgeline above Malamchi Glacier. He'd taken a shortcut over a snowfield, thinning from an early melt when he spotted the flash of color against the stone fabric, frayed and sun-bleached. A backpack. It was wedged between ice and rock near the edge of a crevasse. No blood, no sign of a fall, just a solitary pack, half-frozen, stiff with cold. Tashi waited for a while, shouting into the white, expecting someone to answer. No one did. He didn't want to touch it. There were spirits in these places, old ones, but he finally pulled it free. Inside, a camera, battery long dead. A damp, zippered journal, swollen with moisture. A worn boot with the sole peeling. Some trail mix, vacuum-sealed and untouched. No ID. No passport. But a name stitched faintly into the fabric lining, Rhodes. He carried the pack back down the mountain and turned it over to the village headman, who called the nearest ranger station. A week later, the bag made it to the authorities. From there, a short line in a Kathmandu report logged the find. Unconfirmed belongings, possibly foreign trekker, found near Malamchi Glacier, no body located, no search initiated. Rachel got the email on a Thursday morning. It was sparse, no photos, no coordinates. Just a statement. Backpack matching your brother's description has been found. She called the embassy. They had no further details. Later, a porter who'd briefly examined the bag described something odd. 4 small white stones tucked into the side pocket, arranged in a perfect square. He hadn't touched them. Said they looked placed, not dropped. The journal pages were ruined. Ink bled into paper. But a few words remained, legible fragmented phrases on separate pages. The sound changes at night. Not alone here. And near the back. They don't speak, but they listen. No further evidence emerged. No jacket. No body. No prints in the melting snow. Just a backpack where no backpack should have been. Silent. Waiting. As if it had been left. Not lost. And for the first time, Rachel realized something terrifying. Evan might not be missing. He might be exactly where he meant to be. Rachel Rhodes didn't return home the same. After collecting Evan's backpack from a cluttered ranger outpost near Malamchi, something in her calcified. The airline brought her back to San Diego, but her thoughts never left the Himalayas. She quit her job within a month, stopped answering calls from friends who offered condolences that sounded too final. She didn't want closure. She wanted truth. Every year, on October 8th, Evan's birthday, she flew back to Nepal. Her luggage always the same. Hiking boots, laminated flyers, and the soft shell jacket Evan had left at her apartment 3 days before his flight. Locals came to recognize her. In Siabrubasi, they called her Didi, sister. In Thamel, shopkeepers quietly set aside rooms for her without asking dates. She'd walk the same trails, talk to the same porters, revisit the same dead-end routes, hoping this year would be different. But nothing ever was. She hired a guide in 2017 to take her as far into the eastern ridge as the terrain would allow. They reached the base of a collapsed moraine and found remnants of a burnt incense bundle. The guide swore it was recent. Rachel spent the night alone near the site, listening to the wind sweep across the ice, whispering through stone cairns like voices just out of range. In her journal, she wrote, "He's not lost. He's waiting for something. Or someone. In 2019, she brought a drone, donated by a friend in Oregon. It crashed less than an hour into its flight, the feed freezing mid-frame on a patch of blurred white and a black shape no one could identify. She still watches the footage sometimes. Just in case. Friends back home started to worry. Her lease ended. Her bank accounts thinned. But none of it mattered. Rachel wasn't chasing closure. She was chasing something she couldn't explain. A compulsion. A tether. She carried Evan's last journal in a waterproof sleeve and read from it aloud at high altitudes, as if he might be listening. As if his ghost was tethered to the rocks, waiting to be named. To some, it looked like madness. But to Rachel, it was devotion. If Evan had disappeared to find something, she would walk until she understood what it was. It started small, a missing person thread on Reddit, a few reposts on outdoor forums, a Facebook group titled "Where is Evan Rhodes?" But something about Evan's disappearance gripped people. He wasn't reckless. He was experienced. And yet he vanished more completely than those who'd fallen off cliffs or been caught in avalanches. No wreckage, no signal. Just a whisper of movement past Tianjin, then nothing. The theories came fast. One Redditor posted a photo of 4 stones arranged in a square just like those found in Evan's packhand, claimed they were used by ancient shamans to pin spirits in one place. Another insisted the symbols in Evan's journal matched those of a local cult rumored to live off-grid in caves east of Langtang. They were said to recruit foreigners, seekers, hikers looking for more than just mountains. Some went further. One theory suggested Evan was never lost, had joined something, a pilgrimage, a retreat, a path so secret it required erasing your identity. They called it the snow calling. An enlightenment rite whispered among monks and reclusive mystics. To begin, one must disappear. Then came the darker takes. A YouTube video with over 300 views suggested Evan had uncovered illegal mining operations hidden in the glacier. The video featured shaky drone shots, blurred maps, and a theory that his silence was enforced. The comments spiraled. He saw something he wasn't supposed to. He didn't vanish, was silenced. And then there were the cryptids. One user claimed to have hiked the same trail in 2016 and heard deep breathing outside his tent at 3 a.m., despite no tracks in the snow. Another posted about finding animal bones arranged in spirals. The word Yeti came up more than once. But the thread that stuck with Rachel the most wasn't the loudest. It was a quiet post from an account that's since been deleted. No photos, no fanfare. Just this. Some disappearances aren't accidents. Some are invitations. He was looking for silence. What he found him back. Rachel didn't reply. She didn't need to. The theories were noise. But buried in the noise, sometimes, were echoes, clues. Somewhere out there, people weren't just looking for Evan. They were following him. And that, more than anything, terrified her. Because what if he didn't want to be followed? Rachel didn't mean to share it, not at first. Evan's journals were private rambling, intense, half poems, half confessions written in smudged ink and cramped lettering. But by 2025 years in, with no new evidence, no body, no trail, Rachel made a decision. If Evan had wanted to be found, maybe the answers weren't in search grids or satellite scans. Maybe they were, in his words. She scanned select pages and uploaded them to the Where is Evan Rhodes forum. Not the logistical stuff distances, trail notes, but the other entries. The ones that read like dreams. One, dated 4 days before his disappearance, simply read, "The sky here feels wrong, like it's not above me, but watching me." Another, woke to silence so complete it had weight, stepped outside and saw no tracks, not even my own, but I wasn't afraid. It felt right. The most debated page was a full spread, written at altitude with shaking hands. Saw her again in the snow, still no face, just the shape, the light behind her. Every time I doubt, she comes, not to warn, to call. This isn't a trail, it's a filter. The higher I go, the less of me returns. That feels correct. Some dismissed it as altitude sickness. Others saw mysticism, hallucination, even prophecy. One user commented, "This sounds like someone preparing to dissolve." Rachel didn't explain or interpret, she just posted the entries and logged off. But privately, she kept reading. In Evan's final entries, his tone shifted. The worry disappeared. The fear drained out. What remained was clarity, a strange serenity. He wrote less about survival and more about surrender. "I no longer need the summit," The summit is here, with me, in me. Then the pages stopped. The journal ended not with a goodbye, but a sentence written in bold, deliberate script. To ascend is not to rise, it is to vanish with intention. Rachel printed that line and kept it folded in her coat pocket during her next trip. It wasn't a clue, it was a confession, and for the first time, she wondered if Evan hadn't disappeared by accident, but by design. In 2021, Rachel was speaking with a retired Nepalese intelligence officer, an old man with cataract-fogged eyes, and a limp from the quake when he let something slip. They were sitting in a tea house above Dunche, sharing masala and stories that circled without landing. Then he said, almost absently, "That week, the drone saw strange movement east of Langtang, but it was logged under non-priority anomalies." Rachel froze. "Drones?" she asked. He blinked, realizing too late. "Just weather patterns," he said. "Glacier shift, fog pockets, nothing." But she pressed, and he stopped answering. Back in Kathmandu, she filed a formal inquiry. No reply. So she pushed harder emails to the Department of Tourism, Freedom of Information requests to the Ministry of Defense. Nothing came back. Until one night, an anonymous email landed in her inbox. No greeting, no signature, just a file name and a location. SMIP, eyes, 415.mov. The file wouldn't open. It was encrypted, watermarked with the emblem of the Nepalese Army's Mountain Surveillance Division. Metadata dated it to April 15, 2015, 3 days after Evan's last confirmed sighting. She sent it to experts. One cracked it partially. The footage, low-res and shuddering, showed high-altitude drone visuals over the eastern glacier shelf. For 97 seconds, it was snow and stone. Then, at the 98th, a flicker. A figure small, upright, impossibly still standing at the edge of a crevasse. The footage zoomed, pixelated. The figure did not move. Another few seconds. The drone dips, loses signal, cuts to static. Rachel sent the frame to climbers, cartographers, AI analysts. Some said it was a shadow. Some said it was a crack in the ice. But one forensic imaging expert, after hours of enhancement, responded with a single line. "That's not a shadow, it's someone watching the drone." She tried to follow up. The email bounced, the account deleted. She contacted the Army again. This time, she was told the footage was classified due to sensitive environmental surveillance. The language was cold, final. The footage never aired. The thread discussing it vanished within a day. But Rachel kept the frame printed, blurred, stretched across grainy black and white, and pinned it above her desk. Because in that frozen pixel, she saw what no one else could. She saw Evan, and he was looking up. Langtang is full of stories. Every guide, every porter, every weather-worn climber who's walked those ridgelines has one, but there's one route even they don't name directly. They call it the Hush Trail, or the Spine, or simply that way. Always vague, always avoided. Locals say birds don't fly above it, that prayer flags won't stay tied there, that compasses twitch near the ridge. It's not on any map, because maps require agreement, and no one agrees where it starts, only where it ends. The first time Rachel heard the story, it came from a French climber in a Pokhara guest house. He was lean, sun-battered, chain-smoking without pause. He had summited 3 peaks that season, lost 2 fingers to frostbite, and said the worst night of his life wasn't on a summit. It was on a detour he took east of Kianjin, chasing a shortcut. "I walked into fog," he said. "No sound. My own breath echoed. Then, just past a cairn, everything stopped. My altimeter died. Watch froze. The sky flat. Wrong. Like a room painted white. I turned around. Didn't look back." Others had different versions. A Swiss climber said a friend once pitched a tent above the glacier shelf and woke up 10 feet from a ledge, though he'd driven in his stakes. A Nepali porter claimed his grandfather spoke of the path that listens, and told him never to walk there with a full name in his mouth. A Canadian climber told Rachel flatly, "You don't go there if you want to come back." The common thread wasn't superstition, it was unease. These weren't mystical men. They were engineers, ex-military, teachers, rational, measured. But when the topic shifted to that trail, their posture changed. Voices lowered. Some stories came out only after dusk. One climber, older than the rest, said it best. "Mountains have routes and reasons, but that trail, that one's a mirror. If you walk it, you don't find answers. you find yourself. And most people aren't ready for that. Rachel started marking those conversations on a satellite map. Circles, coordinates, guesses. They all pointed to the same stretch, just east of where Evan disappeared. The place where sound stops. In 2017, the Langtang Trail claimed someone else. Her name was Clara Torres, a 29-year-old solo trekker from Barcelona. She arrived in Nepal that April, bright-eyed, experienced, and methodical. She kept a travel blog with daily updates, photos of glaciers, temple dogs, the steam of early morning chai. Her writing was warm, detailed. She made friends in every village, always checked in, always left notes for the next traveler. Until day 11. She left Kianjan Gompa early in the morning, telling a hostel owner she wanted to go off the main trail for a better view. Her blog mentioned she'd read about Evan Rhodes. She even joked, "Don't worry, I'm not trying to disappear." It was her last post. Her GPS tracker went offline at 4:13 p.m. Altitude 278 meters. Coordinates placed her roughly 10 miles east of Evan's last known location. Then nothing. Search teams mobilized faster than they had for Evan. Times had changed. Tourists meant revenue. Her embassy got involved. Helicopters flew grid patterns for 5 days. They found nothing. No gear. No footprints. Just a trail of pings, then a void. The strange part was her tracker's data. Analysts noted a sharp spike in temperature just before the signal vanished, unusual for that altitude. Weather reports didn't explain it. One tech noted a magnetic anomaly on the last ping. His report was dismissed. Rachel reached out to Clara's family. Her sister responded first, then her father. They'd read about Evan, had questions. Clara had written about him in her private journal, pages the family later released to investigators. One entry stood out. "I keep dreaming of the ridge, the one from the drone still. A voice says not yet. Another says come anyway. I wake up crying. Why does it feel familiar?" She never had a history of delusions or mental illness. Friends described her as grounded, practical. But something drew her off the map, just like Evan. The official report ruled it accidental disappearance, likely terrain-related. But Rachel didn't believe that. Not when two trekkers vanished within 10 miles of each other, both drawn by something invisible. Both last seen walking east. Both swallowed by the same silence. And in Clara's case, one thing chilled Rachel more than anything else. She was wearing Evan's same make of boots, same model, same year. In the spring of 2023, Langtang changed again. The weather didn't behave like it used to. The snow came late, retreated early. Entire shelves of ice that had once groaned with centuries of weight now cracked like glass and slid away in silent shears. What remained underneath was stranger ancient rock faces, twisted spires of blackened stone, moss that hadn't seen sun since before the quake. Locals said the mountain was waking up. Satellite imagery showed drastic melt zones along the eastern ridgelines. What had once been buried beneath tons of glacial ice now stood exposed, raw, almost naked sections climbers hadn't touched in decades. Some areas had no recorded names, just coordinates, just warnings. Geologists arrived to monitor erosion. Surveyors returned with equipment that beeped and clicked and drew invisible lines across the stone. But it wasn't the scientists who noticed the shift first. It was the climbers. The ones who lived in base camps for weeks, who slept on cliff edges and carried their dead friends' names stitched into jacket linings. They began reporting strange opening shoals in the glacier wall, small and angular, like doors. Rope anchors frozen in place, old gear sealed in the ice. None of it should have been there. Not at those elevations, not in those locations. But the mountain didn't care about logic. It had secrets to shed. A Sherpa named Mingmar posted a single image to a private forum, a vertical wall of ice, jagged with melt fractures, and a strange impression near its base. A dent in the glacier, vaguely human-shaped. The photo was blurry. The thread was deleted within hours. Rachel saw the image through a repost. She didn't sleep that night. Not because it looked like Evan, it didn't, but because of where it was taken, roughly 30 kilometers east of Kianjan, along the same cursed ridge the climbers never named. That summer, she flew back again. This time the air felt different, less sharp, less protective, like the mountain had exhaled, like it was finished keeping secrets. The ice was gone now, and whatever had been waiting underneath for years, maybe decades, was beginning to come into view. They weren't searching for a body. Felix Bauer and Dorje Tamang were part of a small climbing science team under contract to a German research firm. Their assignment was to trace a rare mineral deposit serpentine, laced with trace platinum rumored to surface near the thawing ridges east of Langtang. Remote, dangerous, unmapped since 2009. Exactly the kind of work Felix thrived on. Dorje wasn't a fan. He had grown up near Siabrubezi. He knew the stories. He'd heard about the Hush Trail since childhood. But a paycheck was a paycheck, and Felix had insisted on going just a little farther east, toward the glacier shelf, the satellite data marked as unstable. They were ascending slowly along a half-formed moraine when Felix stopped. Something glinted against the ice wall 20 meters ahead. At first, he thought it was rock mica or trash caught in melt runoff. But when he got closer, it didn't shimmer like plastic. It flashed like steel. A carabiner, half embedded in a vertical channel of refrozen ice. Attached to it was rope weathered, frayed, faded almost white. It trailed upward, disappearing into a crack in the glacier. Felix tugged gently. It held. Dorje stood a few meters back, watching. They followed the line up the face, step by step, crampons biting into what remained of the thawing crust. 50 meters up, the rope ended in a knot frozen to a bent piton, punched into a stone lip now exposed. And just below that, something else. Fabric. A sleeve. Then the shape of a body, collapsed into the ice, barely visible but unmistakably human. Preserved in place, almost seated, like someone resting mid-climb. The ice had mummified him, face bowed, arms drawn inward, a pack still strapped to his frame. Lichen clung to the edges of his jacket like the mountain was trying to reclaim him. Felix called it in. The team marked the site, photographed everything, but Dorje wouldn't get close. He just stared. 2 days later, the report reached Kathmandu. When Rachel saw the preliminary images, she knew. Not by the face, that was gone, but by the jacket, the stitching, the brand of rope, the small patch sewn into the backpack's side pocket. Her brother hadn't fallen. He had climbed higher than anyone imagined, and then he had stopped, as if he'd found what he was looking for. The recovery team arrived at dawn. 4 men, 2 ropes, and a silence thick enough to choke. They had seen bodies, before-altitude casualties, slips, frostbite deaths. But this one wasn't like the others. The glacier had preserved him too well, not frozen in agony, not buried by snow, but wedged, upright, inside a narrow crevasse, barely wider than his shoulders. It took hours to cut him free. The ice fought them, sealing its secret like muscle around bone. They worked carefully, melting through with portable steam drills, carving away the walls without touching the body. When they finally freed him, he slid forward with the weight of decades behind him. Knees bent slightly, arms drawn in, chin tilted downward, like someone caught mid-prayer. They laid him out on a tarp beside the opening, and only then noticed what else the ice had hidden. An ice axe, buried parallel to his body, its handle etched with something worn, but deliberate. A string of beads half fused to his jacket collar. A rosary. The cross had snapped, but the beads were intact, dulled by time. And then a notebook, sealed in a plastic sleeve, untouched by water, untouched by rot, still zipped shut in the front chest pocket. They didn't open it on the mountain. Too risky, too fragile. They cataloged everything, bagged each item like evidence, tagged the GPS coordinates. Then they carried him down, one careful ridge at a time. Rachel met the body in Kathmandu 2 days later. The coroner said he was remarkably preserved, ligaments still partially intact, bone structures clear, signs of minor injuries consistent with controlled climbing, not trauma, no fractures. No signs of fall impact. Not a victim of accident, they said. More like someone who stopped. Sat. Stayed. And in the report, scribbled like a footnote. Notably, body position is upright, chest facing outward toward open valley. Suggests purposeful positioning, not collapse. Rachel didn't speak. She just stared at the axe, the rosary, the journal, the last things her brother had chosen to keep. They didn't need the DNA to know. But they ran it anyway. Dental records from Evan's last appointment in San Diego matched the molar structure exactly. A small fracture on the left canine, noted from a skateboarding accident in college, sealed it. The mitochondrial DNA, pulled from bone marrow, came back as a 99.998% match to Rachel. There was no question. No doubt. It was Evan. But it wasn't just the confirmation. It was the how. His body had been upright, folded slightly at the waist, spine arched against the wall of ice. Arms curled inward, not in defense, but something gentler like embrace, or offering. His face had eroded, sunken by time and melt, but the rest remained. The gear on his back was in place, straps secured, zippers closed, no signs of panic, no scrambling. He hadn't died struggling. He'd chosen to be there. Investigators noted the orientation, facing outward, not inward toward the rock, not fallen in, but looking out, through a narrow slit in the ice, toward the valley below, toward the place he'd come from, as if keeping watch, or saying goodbye. The rosary was confirmed as belonging to their grandfather. A family heirloom. Evan had taken it without telling anyone. The axe had no manufacturer's label, just a carved symbol that resembled a spiral. No one recognized it. The notebook was still sealed. Its contents would be cataloged later, page by page. When Rachel stood before him, she didn't cry. Not because she wasn't grieving, but because grief had long passed into something else. This wasn't discovery. It was recognition. The final line of a sentence he'd started writing 8 years earlier. She touched the fabric of his coat faded red, almost pink no, and whispered, "I knew you were still climbing." The official cause of death was listed as hypothermia, probable exposure. But even the medical examiner left a margin, a question, because there were no signs of distress, no desperate final movements, no broken fingers from trying to escape. Just calm, stillness, as if he had waited. Later that night, Rachel opened the notebook. Its first page was dated the day after his last known sighting. The handwriting was steady, intentional. The first line read, "This is not the end, this is the gate." The notebook wasn't thick, but it was deliberate weatherproof paper, a narrow grid, pages numbered in Evan's handwriting. He'd always kept his journals orderly. A habit, he said, helped separate the noise from the signal. The first entries tracked elevation, meals, temperature. Then came sketches of ridgelines, cairns, constellations he tried to memorize. But as the days passed, his words shifted. Less data, more rhythm, more silence between sentences, more space. One entry read, "I've stopped measuring distance. The trail isn't horizontal anymore. It moves through something else." Another, "I heard singing last night. No lyrics. Just a hum, not mine." The closer Rachel got to the end, the more the tone changed. Calm, but heavy. Still, but alert. Something in the way he wrote the pauses, the weight of the ink felt like someone whispering not to her, but to something just beyond reach. One entry was just a symbol, a spiral, drawn over and over in the margin. And then, the final page. No date, no title, just 6 lines, scrawled in darker pen, the strokes pressed hard enough to dent the paper. "They come at night. When the wind stops, they arrive. I hear them before I see them. They don't speak, but they know I'm here. They're not angry, just watching. I am not alone." Rachel read it again, and again. The last word felt colder each time. Not in fear, but in certainty. Not a warning, not a plea. A record. There were no more pages, no more sketches, no goodbye. Just that sentence. The experts called it a delusion, isolation-induced psychosis, a common condition at high altitude, especially after long exposure. But Rachel knew her brother, and there was something about the way he wrote that didn't feel broken. It felt chosen. She ran her fingers over the ink. Not a final scream, not a descent into madness. A message. One that suggested the silence he walked into wasn't silent at all. It was a photo buried in the metadata untouched raw file from the glacier site, logged but never reviewed. A wide shot, snapped by a team member to capture terrain before recovery. Snow, rock, shadow. And then, there just beyond the outline of Evan's final bivvy, sight another trail. Parallel prints, lighter, smaller, leading nowhere. Rachel didn't notice it at first. No one did. But when she zoomed in, when she isolated the depressions against the softened ice, her stomach tightened. 2 sets of tracks. One deeper, deliberate. Evan's. The other, different. Not staggered like animals, not gear-laden like climbers. Just 2 feet, heel to toe, trailing beside his camp, pausing, then turning back. Forensics couldn't confirm the age of the prints. Too degraded. The glacier had shifted. Wind patterns erased half the detail. But the stride was human, upright, measured. And there was no record of any second person in that location, not from Felix, not from Dorje, not from base camp. Evan had climbed alone. The lead investigator dismissed it, said maybe it was Evan scouting his own site. But the depth was inconsistent with his body weight. The angle was wrong. One step even overlapped his own trail from a different direction. Rachel printed the image, circled the second set, stared at it for hours. They came from the east, from higher up, from nowhere. She traced the boot pattern, not a match for Evan's model. Narrower, shallower. The kind of footprint you'd miss if you weren't looking. The kind that wasn't supposed to be there. And suddenly the journal entry came back. They come at night. She wondered what that meant now, not metaphorically, but literally. What had walked beside her brother, then walked away. She sent the image to 5 separate outdoor forensics experts. 3 didn't respond. 2 said the same thing. That's not his. Somewhere near that ridge, in the space between what we think is mapped and what isn't, something had found him, or followed him, or watched him leave this world behind. The snow doesn't keep stories, but sometimes it keeps tracks. And Evan wasn't alone up there. Not at the end, not when the wind stopped. The reconstruction started with the notebook. Evan's sketches weren't exact, but they were intentional contour lines, crude peaks, a crescent-shaped boulder he labeled the gate. Next came the camera. Though dead when recovered, the SD card was salvageable. Inside, 22 photos, mostly terrain. A few blurred stars, one of a stacked stone pillar wrapped in red cord. None of the images matched marked trails. The GPS data, if there had ever been any, was gone. But Rachel noticed something in the margins of the sketches. Tiny arrows, pointing east. Always east. No notes, no captions. Just a silent directive repeated across 4 pages. A small team of climbers volunteered to retrace his steps. Felix led them, guilt lingering from the discovery, a need to understand the place where Evan had stopped. Dorja declined. Some paths, he said, are meant for one. They started from Kyanjin, following the obvious route at first, then veering sharply away from the traditional ridgeline. Evan's notes hinted at a second passone that curved behind the glacier shelf, through a narrow choke of stone. Locals never used it. The wind there moved strangely, they said. Sound echoed wrong. The team climbed for 2 days, reaching altitudes few ever bothered to explore. There were no trail markers, no cairns. But they began finding sign pieces of cloth, snagged on stone, a piece of broken tent pole, faint impressions in the scree like someone had rested there. On the morning of day 3, they reached a flat ridge Evan had sketched repeatedly. The team called it the shelf. It overlooked nothing. No view, no valley, just a stretch of dead rock sloping into cloud. But from the shelf, one path continued a narrow ledge, invisible from below, carved into the mountain's spine. No maps showed it. Satellite scans had missed it. But it was there. And someone had walked it. The path narrowed as it climbed. A single misstep meant death. But still, Evan had gone up. Sketches confirmed the striations in the cliff, the same notch in the rock, the same twisted tree clinging to the slope. The route existed. He hadn't wandered. He'd followed something. A trail not lost but hidden. They found the shrine just after dusk. The ledge narrowed to a fracture in the stone, barely shoulder width. At its end, a cave mouth yawned open black, untouched, breathing cold. Felix hesitated before crossing the threshold. The others waited behind, unwilling or unable to follow. Inside, the air changed. Thick, still, as if the mountain were holding its breath. The walls of the cave were etched with old carvings, not decorative, not art, warnings, spirals, circles, crude shapes of human forms kneeling beneath spiked symbols. Words scrawled in what looked like charcoal, layered over centuries. Do not wake the mountain. Voices are not wind. The gate only opens once. In the center, a mound of stones arranged like a cairn but wrong. Tilted, broken, unstable. Draped in faded prayer flags so old the ink had bled away, leaving only ghosts of intention. Surrounding the mound. Bones. Small ones. Human. Weathered. Bleached. Some arranged in rows, others scattered as if disturbed. A few still bore remnants of cloth monks' robes, by the color. None recent, none fresh, but all real. Felix didn't speak, just turned slowly, shining his headlamp across the far wall. There, above eye level, a symbol carved deeper than the others, a spiral. The same one Evan had drawn again and again. He raised his camera. Took one photo. Then the light flickered. Just a blip. A blink. But when it steadied again, the air felt different. Not colder, not heavier. Just awake. He stepped back out of the cave and rejoined the others without a word. The team descended the next morning. They didn't argue, didn't debrief. What they'd seen didn't need explanation. Some places aren't mysteries. They're messages. Rachel received the photos 2 days later. She stared at the symbol on the cave wall, the spiral carved into stone, identical to the one Evan had left in his journal. It wasn't decoration. It wasn't art. It was a marker. A place he'd reached. A place he may have never intended to leave. The shrine wasn't a place of worship. It was a threshold. A door disguised as a warning. And Evan Rhodes hadn't stumbled onto it. He had followed the signs. All the way to the end. After the notebook was released, after the cave was documented, after Evan's final words were read in headlines across mountaineering forums, the theories began. The rational ones came first, experts pointing to high-altitude cerebral edema, a known danger, a silent one. It causes confusion, hallucinations, even euphoria. Many of Evan's entries, they argued, bore the telltale signs. Sudden clarity, delusions of purpose, conversations with no one, visions in the snow. Classic. But others weren't so sure. His writings weren't erratic. They were consistent, structured, conscious. He dated pages, measured steps. He recorded phases of the moon. Haste doesn't do that. It unravels thought, doesn't build it. And Evan's thoughts had form, intent. One neurologist reviewing the case noted, "If this is delusion, it's the most coherent I've ever seen." Then came the odd details, the temperature spike recorded when Clara's GPS went dark, the drone footage showing a lone figure watching from the ice, the unexplained second set of footprints near Evan's final camp. Too much, some said, to be coincidence. Rachel met with a psychologist who specialized in isolation-induced psychosis. He studied Evan's journal, listened to audio Rachel had recorded of wind patterns from the shelf. He said something strange. "This doesn't sound like delusion," he said. "It sounds like dialogue." The room went quiet. He explained when people hallucinate, their experiences bend inward. Visions reflect memory, fear, desire. But Evan's entries weren't self-referential. He wasn't seeing things from his life. He was recording something external, responding to it, describing it. Something that didn't come from him. That's when older researchers stepped in, anthropologists, cultural historians. They spoke of patterns off remote regions, reporting similar encounters, visions at altitude, warnings carved into rock, words that predate maps. Many scoffed, but a few leaned forward, not because they believed, but because belief wasn't required. Whatever Evan experienced, he wrote about it with reverence. Not panic, not madness. He climbed with it, sat beside it, wrote to it. Some called it altitude sickness. Others called it the edge of reason. But Rachel had read every page. And she wasn't asking if it was real. She was asking what it wanted. In Langtang, you don't talk about the snow whisper. Not directly, not in daylight. It goes by many namashushi, the wind without feet, the one who walks alone. Stories change from village to village, but the shape remains the same, a presence that moves through storms. Not loud, not fast, just close, always just behind. Old porters say it doesn't chase, it waits, follows from a distance, calls softly, but never speaks. You don't hear it. You notice it when the sound disappears, when your shadow lingers after you've turned. They say it draws people off the path. They say once you follow, you never come back. In Siabrabisi, an elder told Rachel a story. Quiet voice. Eyes on the floor. There was a monk, long ago. He walked east, past the shelf. Alone. He left prayer stones behind him like breadcrumbs. When the snow cleared, they were gone. All of them. Like something walked behind him and took them away. In Kanjin, a man with half a hand and a 1,000-yard stare said he once saw his own brother standing outside his tent during a blizzard. His brother had died years before. When he stepped outside, the figure vanished. But there were footprints in the snow, too small for him, too fresh to be imagined. "It doesn't speak," he whispered. "It reminds." The carvings in the cave matched local symbols for boundary and return. Not warnings, but commands. Not for the weak, for the curious. Rachel kept hearing the same word in different dialects, not lost. Not dead, taken. The snow whisper doesn't drag you away. It lets you choose. It waits until you're too far in, until you're tired. Open. And then it fills the silence. Evan's journal echoed the same rhythm. They don't speak, but they know I'm here. Not angry, just watching. I am not alone. Was it a hallucination? A metaphor? Or did Evan hear the same call so many others had ignored? Some stories said if you speak to it, it speaks back. Others said if you follow it, you vanish from the world as you know it. Not with violence, with quiet. And in the stillness of the glacier, at the edge of everything, Evan Rhodes didn't run from it. He walked toward it. It started with a comment on a forum, then a message sent privately to Rachel's inbox, then a voicemail from a man who wouldn't give his name but said, "I know the sound your brother heard." They were climbers seasoned, respected, men and women who had summited Everest, crossed K2's bottleneck, survived things most wouldn't dream of. And one by one, they started sharing things they had never written in trip reports or mentioned in summit interviews. They all started the same way. I thought it was just me. One spoke of a stretch above Tsurgo Ri where the air went too quiet. He checked his oxygen levels normal, but everything around him felt still, frozen beyond the cold. He heard something behind him. Not wind. Not footfall. A presence. When he turned, there was nothing, but he lost track of time. Hours gone. No memory. Just a new scar on his hand he didn't remember getting. Another described light small, bluish-white orbs drifting near his camp during a snowstorm. He thought it was headlamps, but when he called out, the lights blinked out. That night, his climbing partner woke up outside the tent, barefoot, staring up at the stars. He had no idea how he got there. A Sherpa guide said he saw a figure perched on a ridge at twilight motionless, silhouetted against the snow. When he raised his binoculars, the shape dissolved like smoke. The next day, he found a spiral etched into the ground with perfect symmetry, wind untouched. None of them had spoken until now. Out of fear, out of disbelief. Because these mountains already demand so much from those who climb them, doubt is an unaffordable luxury. But Evan's discovery changed that. The photos, the journal, the footprints, the shrine. It all made something long whispered, finally speakable. They weren't alone. Whatever Evan had seen, whatever had watched him in those final nights, it had watched others too. Moved beside them. Touched their thoughts. Bent the rules of time just enough to leave a question. And now, the stories were surfacing. Not to scare, not to explain. But to say, it's real. And it's always been there. There was one photo that didn't make sense. Taken 2 days before Evan's last journal entry, it showed a patch of snow around his tent clean, undisturbed, save for a pattern traced into the surface. A spiral, wide, deliberate, almost perfect. A single line etched around his camp in one continuous loop. Rachel hadn't noticed it at first. Most hadn't. But a Himalayan folklore scholar spotted it in a news report still and reached out. He'd seen the pattern before. On cave walls. On monastery pillars abandoned for centuries. In oral traditions passed down in mountain villages where elders refused to speak its name. It was a containment symbol, he said, or a calling one, depending on how it was drawn, depending on what was being asked. The theory spread quickly among the circles, now watching Evan's case. Was he trying to summon something? Protect himself? Complete a rite? Or had he simply replicated what he saw elsewhere, recording, not performing? His journal gave no direct answer, but fragments hinted at intent. The spiral is not the path, it's the lock. I only walk it clockwise. Backwards makes the night too loud. I think it knows what I'm trying to do. Some believe the spiral was part of an ancient ritual to hold something in place to keep it bound to the ridge, unable to cross into lower ground. Others thought it was the opposite, a gateway. A shape meant to invite. More unsettling was this. Satellite imagery taken by a glacier study team weeks later revealed another spiral, larger, cruder, drawn miles away near the cave site. Its formation had gone unnoticed, its lines shallow but visible in melted runoff, as if someone or something had recreated the shape. But Evans was first. And it encircled his last known shelter. Ritual or not, it was clear he believed in its purpose, believed it mattered, that it meant something. Maybe it was protection, maybe an offering, maybe a map only certain eyes could read. But in the middle of that spiral sat one man, alone, writing, watching, not running. And that night, when the wind stopped, he waited. It took her 8 years to find him, 1 more to return. Rachel arrived in Langtang at the end of September, just before the first snowfall. The air was thin but kinder than beforeless, sharp, less punishing. Locals greeted her quietly. They remembered her. The woman who kept coming back. The one who hadn't stopped looking. She packed light. No camera crew, no guide. Just Felix, who insisted on coming, not to lead, just to make sure she came back down. The climb wasn't easy. She hadn't trained for it. But she didn't need to. This wasn't about reaching anything. It was about standing in the place her brother had stood, where his pack had frozen into the wall, where his final breath had risen and vanished into the sky. They reached the shelf by late afternoon. The wind was still, the rocks undisturbed. Even the snow felt quieter. Rachel didn't cry. She thought she might. Instead, she knelt. From her coat pocket, she pulled out a smooth gray stone flat with a slight ridge along one side. It had sat on the windowsill of their childhood bedroom for years. Evan used to balance coins on it, said it was the right kind of uneven. She placed it at the edge of the outcrop, just beneath the faded spiral someone had etched into the frost weeks earlier. Not deep, just enough to mark. The stone looked small there, insignificant. But she knew Evan would have smiled at that. He liked things that didn't try to belong. Felix stood a few steps away, silent. Rachel whispered something, but the wind swallowed it. She stayed until the shadows reached her boots, then rose and turned back. She didn't take anything with her. Didn't want to. The mountain had already given her enough. She descended slowly, one foot after the other. No rush, no fear. When she reached the village that evening, she didn't speak of what she saw, only what she felt. She said, "He wasn't lost, just elsewhere." And no one disagreed. Because by then, they had all heard the quiet too. 3 months after Rachel's return, the notebook went public. Not through tabloids or thrill seekers, but through a small mountaineering press specializing in expedition journals. The title was simple: The Ridge. Final Writings of Evan Rhodes. The introduction was written by Rachel. 2 paragraphs. No theories. Just gratitude. And one final note. This is how he chose to speak. Let him be heard. The response was immediate and divided. Some called it haunting. Others called it beautiful. A few accused it of being fiction. Too poetic, too perfect, too strange to be real. But those who had spent time in the high places, who'd heard silence bend in unnatural ways, understood. The journal started as a record. Dates, elevations, coordinates. It charted progress, measured distance, counted days. But somewhere after the midpoint, after the sighting in Numthang, after the spiral appeared, the tone shifted. His entries grew more sparse. Not weaker, just more intentional. Like he was conserving words. Or waiting to understand before writing again. By the final 5 pages, the fear was gone. Replaced by something else. "They don't mean harm," he wrote. "They're not guiding me. They're reminding me of something I used to know. I thought the climb was upward. It isn't. It's inward. There's no summit, just a threshold." The final entry wasn't the one that made headlines. It came after the "I am not alone" passage, a single sentence added at the bottom of the last page, written smaller but clearer than all the others. "I think I understand now." That was it. No revelation, no answer, just that. Readers debated endlessly. What did he understand? What had he seen? What had waited for him in the ice and quiet? Rachel refused interviews. She didn't want to explain. She had already done her part. She had listened. Bookstores sold out in a week. Forums reignited. Climbers returned to old photos. Locals told their stories again. But in quiet corners of the world, a few people read that final line and didn't ask what he saw. They asked what they might have forgotten. And whether, one day, they might understand too. The story had already gone viral online. Podcasts dissected the journal, Reddit threads spilled over with theories. But when National Geographic picked it up, everything changed. They announced the special in April, The Evan Rhodes Mystery, Beyond the Trail. A full-hour documentary, with exclusive interviews, drone footage of the shelf, thermal scans of the cave. Rachel agreed to participate, but only on the condition that they wouldn't dramatize what didn't need drama. They kept their word. The broadcast aired on a Sunday night. Within minutes, it trended worldwide. People watched, transfixed, as high-definition shots revealed the ridge where Evan had disappeared. The producers had hiked to the exact site. They showed the prayer flags, the etched warnings in the cave, the precise spiral carved into the snow around his final camp. They read from Evan's journal, his words spoken over images of wind-blown peaks and endless white silence. Rachel's segment was brief but unforgettable. She stood near the edge of the shelf, where she'd left the childhood stone. "I don't think he was scared," she said. "I think he chose to listen to something most of us ignore." The episode ended with a slow pan across the glacier, accompanied by Evan's final line, "I think I understand now." It should have brought closure, but instead, it sparked something else. Interest surged, forums reignited, linguists analyzed the spiral, anthropologists debated the cave's purpose, altitude specialists reviewed the physiological limits of human endurance in silence. But the conclusion of the documentary offered no easy answer. No final cause of death, no explanation for the second set of prints, no debunking of the strange phenomena he'd described. Just the haunting realization, everything Evan left behind made less sense the more it was studied. The documentary didn't solve the mystery. It widened it. And for thousands watching from living rooms and laptops across the world, the feeling was the same. He'd gone somewhere few ever reach. And whatever he found there, he hadn't come back empty-handed. The autopsy said he died in 2015, but new evidence said otherwise. After the National Geographic special aired, a glaciologist from Zurich requested access to the recovery data. Not the journal, not the photos, just the environmental conditions logged during body extraction. What he found raised questions no one had asked before. The tissue around Evan's major joint knees, elbows, spine showed a preservation pattern inconsistent with a body frozen for 8 straight years. Ligaments were more supple than expected. Cartilage hadn't collapsed the way it should have under prolonged ice compression. Even bone marrow samples retained a level of cell density that suggested a fresher death. In simpler terms, she shouldn't have been that intact. A second opinion followed. Then a third. Finally, a team from the Himalayan Institute submitted a controversial paper. Estimated time of death, 2015 to 2019. Rachel received a copy in the mail. She stared at the range. 4 years. 4 years where Evan could have still been alive. Writing, wandering, waiting. But where? The ridge wasn't that vast. The glacier didn't hide people. And the spiral around his final camp dated to his last known year. Or so they thought. Then came the drone review. A university team ran thermal scans from old military flights, archived during the time of civil unrest in Nepal. One file, from 2017, showed a faint heat signature 200 meters from Evan's final site. No one had been searching then. The area was off limits. The signature disappeared in later passes. Speculation exploded. Had Evan survived for years? Found shelter near the cave? Was he being helped or held? Some suggested he hadn't returned because he couldn't. Others believed he never wanted to. Theories multiplied. That he'd found something sacred. That he'd crossed into a space not meant to be known. That the spiral wasn't a barrier but a door that only closes from the inside. Rachel didn't comment. But privately, she reread one of the final pages. The one where he wrote, "Time doesn't move the same here. It stretches, waits, forgets." And she wondered, had Evan Rhodes truly vanished in 2015? Or had he been walking in silence for years? Long after the world had given up? It was found by accident. While preparing the journal for preservation, a technician at the archival lab noticed something tucked into the back cover, a thin plastic sleeve, frayed at the edge. Inside, a Polaroid, weather-warped and faded, its edges curled from years of cold and pressure. At first it looked blank, just a haze of white and gray snow perhaps, or fog. But under digital enhancement, details emerged. A ridgeline, the faint arc of the sun, and in the lower quadrant, a figure, distant, alone, standing at the edge of what looked like a narrow pass carved into rock. He wasn't facing the camera. He was facing away toward the horizon. The timestamp on the Polaroid's frame had degraded. But after examining film type, weather conditions, and light angle, experts concluded the image had likely been taken weeks, maybe months after Evan's presumed death. That shouldn't have been possible. Even stranger, the photo wasn't mentioned in the journal. No caption, no date, no explanation. But something about it felt deliberate. He had hidden it, protected it, placed it where it might one day be found, but only by someone careful enough to look beyond the obvious. The image sent ripples through the climbing community. Investigators re-reviewed timelines. Rachel flew to Zurich to see the original in person. She stared at the figure for a long time, then whispered, "That's his walk." The same posture, the same tilt of the head. Not stumbling. Moving. Slowly. intentionally, as if toward something he knew was waiting. Some theorized the photo was meant as proof that he had survived, that he had found something beyond the ridge. Others believed it was a farewell, a snapshot taken by someone or something else, a parting image of a man who had crossed a line and would not return. But there were no answers on the back. No handwriting. Just the mountain behind him, wide and silent. And a figure, shrinking into the snow, without fear. The trail ends where it began. High on a ridge where maps fade into myth, where sound doesn't echo and time doesn't run straight, where a man disappeared not by force, but by choice. Or something like it. For 8 years, Evan Rhodes was missing. Then found, then questioned all over again. Every detail of his story unraveled the more it was studied. His journal read like scripture to some, delusion to others. His spiral, a map, a shield, a key, depending on who held the theory that day. And then there was the Polaroid. That one image, blurry and unexplained, standing outside logic. It didn't say help. It didn't scream trapped. It said, forward. Rachel kept it in a sealed frame by her window. She never tried to explain it. Never answered the emails from documentary crews or podcast producers or believers looking for pilgrimage routes. She had nothing left to prove. Because deep down, she knew something everyone else seemed to miss. Evan wasn't taken. He went. Every line in his journal pointed to it. Every decision on that route was his. The detour, the symbols, the spiral. He wasn't lost in the mountains. He had followed something into them. Something he didn't fear. Something he may have always been seeking. And in the end, that was the part no one could understand. Not the footprints, not the preserved body, not the missing years, but the willingness, the quiet acceptance. The final sentence, carved not in words but in distance. I think I understand now. Did he find enlightenment? Did he vanish into myth? Was he just a man who walked too far? The trail doesn't say. The mountain never answered, only stood there, waiting, as it always had. And maybe that's the truth of it. Some vanish. Others are chosen. But either way, the ridge keeps its secrets. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.